We drove through some private grounds and stopped in front of a large house. A servant ran out to take charge of our horse. The front door opened before we had reached it, and a small, fair woman in a pink silk dress hurried out to meet us. "Well?" she cried eagerly. "Well?" Perhaps she thought for a moment that Holmes's friend was her lost husband. Holmes shook his head. "No good news?" she asked. "None." "But no bad news either?" "No." "Well, come in. You must be very tired. You have had a long day's work." "This is my friend, Dr. Watson. He has been of great use to me in several of my cases. By a lucky chance, he has been able to come with me this evening." "I am pleased to meet you," said Mrs. St. Clair, pressing my hand warmly. She led us into a pleasant dining room where there was a cold supper laid out on the table. "Now, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I have one or two questions to ask you, and I should like you to answer them truthfully." "Certainly, Mrs. St. Clair." "It is your real opinion that I want to know." "About what?" Holmes asked. "Do you truly believe that Neville is still alive?" Holmes did not seem to like this question. "Truly now?" she repeated, looking at him as he leaned back in his chair. "Truly then?" "I do not," he answered at last. "You think he is dead?" "Yes." "And that he was murdered?" "I don't know. Perhaps." "And on what day did he die?" "On Monday, June the 15th. "Then, Mr. Holmes, how do you explain this letter that I have received from him today?" Sherlock Holmes jumped out of his chair. "What?" he shouted. "Yes, today." Smiling, she held up an envelope. "May I see it?" "Certainly." In his eagerness, he seized it from her quite rudely, smoothed it out on the table, and examined it very thoroughly. I looked at it over his shoulder. The envelope was a cheap one, and it had been posted at Gravesend in Kent earlier in the day. "The handwriting on the envelope is poor," said Holmes. "Surely this is not your husband's writing, Mrs. St. Clair?" "No, but the letter inside is in his handwriting." "I see that whoever addressed the envelope had to go and find out your address." "How can you tell that?" "The name, you see, is in perfectly black ink and has been allowed to dry slowly. The address is almost grey, which proves that sand has been thrown on the writing to dry it. The man who wrote this envelope wrote the name first and then paused for some time before writing the address. The only explanation is that he did not know it. But let us look at the letter. Ah, some object has been enclosed in this." "Yes," said Mrs. St. Clair. "There was a ring. Neville's ring." "And are you sure that this is in your husband's writing?" "Yes, though it's easy to see that he wrote it in a great hurry." This is what the letter said. "Dearest Olivia, do not be frightened. Everything will be all right. There is a mistake that it will take some time to put right. Wait patiently. Neville." "This," said Holmes, "is written in pencil on a page torn from some book. It was posted by a man with a dirty thumb, and whoever closed the envelope had a lump of tobacco in his mouth. Well, Mrs. St. Clair, things are beginning to seem a little more hopeful, but I do not think the danger is over yet." "But Neville must be alive, Mr. Holmes." "Unless this letter is the work of a clever man, After all, the ring proves nothing. It may have been taken from him.
No, that's certainly his own handwriting.
Very well. But the letter may have been written on Monday and only posted today.
That is possible.
If that is so, many things may have happened between the 2 days.
Oh, you must not make me lose hope, Mr. Holmes. I know that Neville is all right. Our relationship is such a strong one that I always know when he has an accident. On that last morning, he cut himself in the bedroom, and although I was in the dining room, I knew immediately that something had happened to him. I rushed upstairs and found that I was right. Do you think I could possibly not know about it if he had been murdered?
But if your husband is alive and able to write letters, why should he remain away from you?
I can't imagine.
And on Monday, he said nothing unusual before leaving home.
Nothing.
And you were surprised to see him at that window in Upper Swandam Street?
Yes, extremely surprised.
Was the window open?
Yes.
Then he could have spoken to you.
He could, but he only cried out, as if he were calling for help, and he waved his hands.
But it might have been a cry of surprise. Shock at the sight of you might have caused him to throw up his hands.
It is possible, but I thought he was pulled back from the window.
He might have jumped back. You did not see anyone else in the room, did you?
No, but that ugly cripple admitted that he was there, and the owner of the place was at the foot of the stairs.
Did your husband seem to be wearing his ordinary clothes?
Yes, but he had no collar or tie on. I saw the skin of his throat quite clearly.
Had he ever mentioned Upper Swandam Street to you?
Never.
Had he ever shown any signs of having taken opium?
No, never.
Thank you, Mrs. St. Clair. We will now have a little supper and then go to bed. We may have a very busy day